Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on how to balance innovation and reliability with service level objectives. Today, we'll be defining what SLOs are, sharing some best practices, and also walk through a live demo on how your team can prioritize your engineering efforts to deliver optimal customer experiences. So before we kick off, here are a few housekeeping items. We highly encourage questions so that this is a highly interactive webinar. So feel free to pop those into the Q&A window and we will answer them in our live Q&A section at the end of the presentation. After the webinar, we'll also be sharing this recording with you all, so feel free to share those with your teams. Here's our agenda for today. So first of all, we'll put things into context by defining some challenges that are changing the way that modern software teams must operate. We'll then define what SLOs are and share why they're the solution to breaking the speed and reliability compromise. Then we'll walk through a few common pitfalls that teams typically face when trying to implement SLOs, and we'll also share a real case study of one of our customers. We'll then dive into a live demo of a typical SLO workflow and how you can build a long-term process around operationalizing SLOs. And then finally, at the end of the session, we'll share some details on how you can join our Alpha program and also have some time for live Q&A. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ashar and Dyllen to introduce themselves.
Thanks a lot, Ansi. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashar Rizqi, co-founder and CEO of Blameless.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dyllen Owens, staff software engineer at Blameless. I also am the team lead for the SLO product.
Great, and we'll dive right in. I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer before we go deeper into this. This session is not going to cover the basics of SLOs. And the reason why is because there's a lot of literature out there that you can sort of read up on your own. What we're really going to be focusing on is practical implementation challenges that we personally have experienced, that we've seen with other folks as well. And just, I think that's what's really going to drive an interactive discussion here. So I thought I'd just put that out there. If you are looking for some really basic level understanding of what SLIs, SLOs, and error budgets are, we'll cover it in a very, very short amount of time. But if you're looking for more information, we're happy to share some resources offline as well. Let's talk about very quickly, let's set the problem here, which I'm sure a lot of you folks are facing today, depending on the size and complexity of your organization, which is that when it comes to building and delivering modern software and modern applications, the number one problem that is being faced by almost every single organization out there today is the complexity that comes with it. And that's a function of the fact that there's architectural complexity where some folks are doing monolithic and microservice type architectures. There's a desire to be on-premise as well as leverage some of the cloud infrastructure services out there as well, and platform services. There's a desire to do multi-cloud now, and there's a greater proliferation of that out there. And so really all of that equals complexity at every single layer of the software development lifecycle, every single part of the stack. It's just not a simple one solution, one size fits all kind of thing. And really what that means is that there's complexity in how these systems interact with each other, how you set up your organization, how the teams interact with each other. And the biggest challenge is, how do you make sense of all the data that's out there? And how do you make meaningful business decisions and level up, these conversations, so that you're not hurting your users and your customers. Next slide, please. So it really just comes down to, this imperative here, which is on one axis, there's this desire and need to have rock solid reliability. But the challenge is that if that's what you're optimizing for, you're clearly not innovating. And you can swing to the other side of the spectrum where you're moving too quickly, you're pushing a lot of change, and taking on a lot of risk and technical debt, which then affects your customer experiences, which can then have effect either on your top line businesses, reputation, and all that kind of stuff. So then it's really a question of how do you find the balance between those two? And what we're about to present is one there's no one single answer to this, but this is one of many, but one we found very effective mechanism to help you balance that. Next slide, please. And the challenge is that this problem that we're talking about is only getting worse. Again, going back to that complexity, and of course, post-COVID, you know, there's this there's this imperative to do more with fewer resources, you know, just given the macroeconomic environment and situation. So this problem is already becoming more acute. And you know, when you know, if you were further back in this timeline, well, and you found yourself, you know, in this kind of situation, in this macroeconomic world, microenvironment, you know, it's a pickle, right? And what's happening is that those expectations from your users around, you know, new features and reliability and availability, security, quality is only increasing exponentially. But what's not changing as quickly are the set of resources that are available to you, right? You're not going to be able to hire fast enough. You're not going to be able to, you know, spend enough money in a efficient and effective manner to be able to resolve these issues. So then the question becomes, how do you actually get ahead of this? Next slide. So service level objectives is, as I mentioned, one of many, a really effective tool in your tool belt to help you manage that, to get to that imperative of balancing innovation and speed. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we mean by that. Next slide, please. So SLOs stand for service level objectives. And what they really are is, you know, is just guardrails. They become this common language that companies use, and that allows them to put guardrails and incentives to drive, you know, high levels of service reliability, high enough levels of service reliability. And the key word being here is enough, without compromising the ability to deliver on customer expectations, right? And what we've seen, and what many of you may find yourself in today, is that you're in this reactive mode, you know, where reacting to NPS or churn or reacting to incidents, you know, and always being in this reactive mode, and kind of becomes a way of life. And the problem is that for many teams, that's extremely expensive, right? It's an expensive use of time and money and resources. What SLOs and air budgets give you is that they, you know, they give you the objective language and measure of how we should be talking about reliability. And the inverse of that, one minus an SLO, it gives you really this new language around error budgets. And it's really, the error budget is what is an acceptable amount of failure? And failure is like a very wide definition, right? Today, slow is down, right? And so what is the acceptable amount that for our customers, you know, that we can tolerate, that our customers can tolerate, and that doesn't compromise our ability to deliver. Next slide. Okay, so again, just a recap of why we have SLOs. And SLI here stands for Service Level Indicator, which again really maps to the experience that your customers are having, your users are having. And the SLO is the target threshold, right? This bar in the middle, at which point your customer happiness sort of tips over, can move into the unhappiness domain, right? And that is like a very clear indication of, you know, that you can tie to like a successful or unsuccessful outcome that you're trying to drive in your business, right? The question becomes, how do we turn this into an early warning indicator? Next slide, please. Okay. As I've mentioned, SLOs provide a shared language. And what ends up happening is that this becomes, and we'll go into some specific case studies and use cases here, that they become the shared language on how to focus your product development efforts, your engineering efforts. And once you do these well, or well enough, you can get to a point of being proactive about remediation, right? Proactively, you know, one of our thought leaders on our team, Amy Toby, she uses this analogy, which really resonates with me, which is that SLOs, you can think of SLOs as climatology, right? Global warming is coming, for example. That's not a political statement, it's just an example. And then you have meteorology, which is sort of the day-to-day measure, and the equivalent analogy of that is real-time monitoring is like meteorology, and SLOs are like climatology, because it's a early warning indicator that there is a shift about to happen in something that is really important to you. And once you have that, it really allows you to focus and prioritize your efforts in the right area. Next slide, please. Okay, so what better place to talk about SLOs than to sort of reflect inward and talk, and very transparently and openly share with you folks on our story and our SLO journey and how we went about, quite honestly, not getting it right the first few times, and then through those failures, starting to get it right later on. And really the big thing, the big trigger for us, was that we were tracking NPS and churn as key business metrics for us. And again, the challenge with those metrics is that they are lagging indicators. They're not leading indicators. And by the time you start to see any kind of meaningful information come, it's probably too late, right? And we started to see that in, a lot of our customer experiences. And this was about 8 or 9 months ago. And so we, had tried to launch this SLO product several times and, failed a few times before we started to formulate an opinion on where we felt like here are the set of challenges that we really want to solve. And so, we went through this exercise of setting up SLOs as a company. And one of the things that we took up as a leadership team is that we said that, SLOs will be the way in which we, it becomes the error budget becomes the currency, and SLOs are the way in which we report one mechanism of reporting product efficiency to the board, right? And the board was concerned and saying like, hey, why is there this certain amount of churn happening? Why do we have NPS scores that aren't trending in the right direction? And it's hard to have those conversations without an objective measure. So that SLO became that objective measure, right? And as we started to put that, we started defining our SLOs and user journeys, and we're going to like what actually goes and happens there. But the end result was we now report the SLO as a company level KPI at the board level. So everybody at the highest levels within, the leadership team can all agree to and understand, like, why do we have this KPI? Why do we care about this metric? Because it happens to become a really strong indicator of our user happiness. And more importantly, it's an early indicator, right? It's not a lagging indicator, it's an early indicator. And the other thing that became really relevant for us from, a burn and finance perspective is that it was also a signal of what our product delivery efficiency was. Like, how many times were we tripping our SLO and consuming our error budget? Because every time you consume your error budget, it means that development efforts, engineering efforts have to shift to reliability work. And those are efforts that are not going into feature development, and trying to enter new markets with new products and stuff like that, which is a perfectly fine thing to do, by the way. By no means am I saying one is better than the other, but very much, if there is a top line objective that you are trying to accomplish, then, tripping an SLO definitely moves the needle in the other direction, right? The other thing that the board started to see is that it's putting the customers first, right? We are putting our money where our mouth is, when many companies say that, hey, we put customers first because we have a great customer support and success practice and stuff like that. This is also a practice that can be put in place that indicates that we are treating customers as, like they come first, right? And most recently, we started to see some really interesting patterns emerge where because of these SLOs and tracking our error budget burn down and the rate at which we were consuming our error budget, we started detecting issues, potential customer impacting issues, before they became customer facing incidents, which is like, quite honestly, like sort of the nirvana of SLOs. Now it's not the ultimate promise, and it's not something that everybody should hang their hat on, but definitely one of the benefits, one of the really sort of delightful things that we saw is when we started detecting things, that were going to become potentially customer impacting issues, right? And again, the SLO now becomes this shared knowledge, shared context framework that you can leverage with your board members. Like, it's kind of like, just like NPS, or just like, or ARR, the SLO becomes this metric that everybody understands. Like, what does it mean? It's like relatively simple concept to explain, especially the error budget. Everybody understands what budgeting is and what the implications of those are, right? So next slide, please. Great. Now I'll pass it on to Dyllen.
Thanks, Ashar. So Ashar did a really, really good job on explaining to you kind of SLOs at a high level. I want to take you through kind of the stages of what SLOs are and your implementation phases. If we look here, right, we already talked about what an SLI is and what an SLO is at a really high level. But really, when you dive down into an SLI, you want to measure generally a couple of things in your service. And it is a quantitative measure through some APM platform. Traditionally, you're going to either use latency or availability. And those are response times, including queue wait time in milliseconds. Or you might have something as an error rate. These are kind of more advanced SLIs, but they are kind of a tie back into the customer satisfaction and potentially the developer happiness. And we often talk a lot about SLOs being customer satisfaction, but there's also the inverse of that, which is developer satisfaction and happiness. And really the benefit to that is understanding that when a developer sets up an SLI measuring their service, they do it in two stages. One, an SLI that's going to directly impact the customer, and potentially two, an SLI that directly influences the health and the availability or the latency or the performance of said service. Once you have all those set up, you move into your SLOs, obviously, like we talked about. And really, those are just targets against your SLI. We have this notion of composite SLIs, which is many SLIs attributing back up to a larger SLO. Those end up being a bit more complex in nature, but they're really beneficial if you have services that have a lot of different calls, but they're all transparent to one user journey. So you want to take all of those and bubble those up instead of having multiple SLOs kind of spread across the place and aggregating and doing that knowledge information up to the top level in your head. And then service level agreements are pretty much things that are set by lawyers. Oftentimes us engineers or SREs or any infra people aren't really setting up SLAs, but really the way to think how SLAs tie back to SLOs is SLOs are your gate, and when anything happens to an SLA kicks in. They're the actions that are taken upon when your SLO fails. It's kind of something that we won't hear a lot when we're talking about SLOs, but it's good to cover on. Next slide, please. So yeah, key stakeholders in defining SLOs. So SLOs can generally start at the grassroots level, but it requires a lot of orchestration between a number of different teams. As you can see here, we need product owners to understand the value of an SLO, but we also need product owners to help set what the objective target we want for SLOs to be. Engineers are not a good person to decide that because we are responsible for building the products, and same with the SREs and the infra engineers are responsible for delivering the project or product in terms of access to the overall customer. But when you move from that, then the SRE and the operations people need to help understand exactly how the application gets deployed and then set up monitoring on that. And SLOs directly tie into that because it gives a forefront, like Ashar said in the climatology aspect, it gives them a way to gauge the overall health without looking at real-time metrics. And then the engineers are responsible purely for defining what the best SLIs for their product are. They'll work with a number of SRE engineers or infra engineers at the same time to kind of develop these SLIs that they feel would be useful. And then it funnels down into the customer. And this directly ties back into understanding what your user journeys are. And you need to differentiate between internal and external, as well as primary and key stakeholders. So it's an entire gamut of people that need to be orchestrated in order to do this. And it requires buy-in from all people at all levels to really make SLOs successful within an organization. Next slide. So we talked about the components of an SLO, and the way that we described it in our product is we have the concept of user journeys, which is really a bucket for collecting key paths within your system that a user will interface on a daily cadence, and something that is integral to the performance of your application and something that you need to monitor. Calculate SLIs and SLOs, that's when we connect everything together and we tie it back to the user journey. And then monitor SLOs. This is when our system actually starts to aggregate the data and funnel it back into your error budgets. And you'll define your error budgets roughly in the same conjunction to when you actually start defining your SLOs and your user journeys. You generally will have more knowledge on defining your error budgets after you've decided on what your key user journeys are, you've set up your SLIs, and then you've set up your objective targets to your thresholds inside of your SLO. And then alerting, a key thing to our system is what we want to do. SLOs need to have some action taken upon them. If you just have it as a dashboard that sits in another system, it's not going to be really useful to you. So we want to act upon those. And what we do is those error budgets are directly influenced by error budget policies that are set up on when things start to decrease in thresholds or they start to blow their entire budget. Well, there's a number of things that we use, from creating incidents internally within Blameless, being able to create JIRA tickets, or being able to just email or send direct Slack messages. And the whole concept of all of this is to minimize the toil. And it really, the best way to do that is adopting these SRE best practices, and SLO is kind of one of those founding principles that are starting to become a bit more explained and understood through the rest of the SRE world. Next slide. So yeah, this is a deeper dive into error budgets and understanding this. So, an error budget is basically the percentage of remaining you have in terms of your SLO. So we try to calculate everything based on 100%, but nothing is 100% available. And that's the core principle of an SLO, is trying to define how much availability you have in conjunction to trying to achieve 100% availability. And you can see through this calculation that we have below, if we have a 1% acceptance or error budget rate over a 30-day month. And generally what we'll try to institute is a rolling window versus a historical purview into your data. And this kind of keeps that SLO fresh and constantly moving forward, and something that you can monitor. But you could see from the calculation below, if you only have 1%, you only have 43 minutes a month to fault over your error budget. And an SLI is purely put is good events divided by valid events times 100%. And that's really what we're calculating there. And we use that in conjunction to determine how much budget you have and how much goes against all your violations in your error budgets. Next slide. Key challenges, siloed data. A lot of us live in a world where we're purely working on a single piece of code or a single product, and our heads are very much down. And like it says below, data lives across multiple observability vendors. It really does. An engineer might use Splunk or Prometheus, an SRE might use Service Mesh or something else in a number of disparate services. And the goal with SLOs is to try to tie all of that data back together and provide you an insight into exactly how your application is performing to customer satisfaction. SLOs lack of process and alignment. When set up in a silo without a collaborative process, SLOs often fail to adopt or to gain adoption. And that's very true. When we've had engineers in Blameless try to set up SLOs in a very much siloed manner, they don't gain any traction. They end up being just a metric that's sitting in a dashboard, and no one has the vested buy-in to do anything when the budgets start to fail, or the SLOs start to invalidate data through methods getting removed, etc. Treating it as one and done. So SLOs will need to be continuously revalidated. This is very true. When you create SLOs, you should have some level of operationalized aspect to them, whether it's a weekly cadence meeting or something you do in your sprint lifecycle, so every 2 weeks. It's really important to do this, because if you don't continuously monitor your SLOs, they do end up just being something that sits on the side. And you need to constantly revalidate if your SLO is correct, if the SLI is set up correctly, and if it's truly measuring and capturing what you expect the customer to be feeling. Next slide. So we have a large global ride-hailing company that we did a case study with, and their stack was Prometheus doing all of their real-time service metrics with Cortex sitting in the front. And then what we've done here, we work with them, is crafting and designing their user journeys and SLOs against their product. One of the big things was showing transport home screen. That was huge in terms of customer satisfaction. If they weren't able to do that, or they were able to do that slowly, it immediately affected their actual ARR. It was really something they needed to track critically early and often. We helped set those up, and then we helped connect all their SLIs through their services. And then we worked with them to set error budget policies and understanding, exactly what you want to measure, exactly the volume that you want to measure, and what you want your actions to do once these budgets have been exhausted. And then we worked with them to really create an operational plan around SLOs. And a big piece for them was creating incidents and problem tickets after an error budget was exhausted. And really, they had in their key user journeys down below, you can see they had the create a booking and viewing booking details, the display price estimation and route, pickup selection and find a driver, and overall mobile app reliability. These were critical, and we worked directly with them to do this. And these were the things that they were able to measure and effectively use our product to gauge their customer satisfaction. Next slide. Blameless really tries to stay agnostic at the core of it. If you look, a lot of APMs today, they have a very, very siloed approach, right? They're an APM, they expect your agent information funnel into them, and then you do some aggregation internally within their system. But for us, we want to be able to ingest data from anything to provide that maximum flexibility when setting up your SLOs. We integrate with App Dynamics, Datadog, New Relic, Prometheus, and Splunk. And then we also tie in with infra provisioning and change events through Terraform, Kubernetes, GitLab, GitHub, etc. So you can see pretty much from this list, we really try to stay agnostic and allow you the flexibility to use our system with whatever product you have today. Next slide. Perfect. So let's dive into a live demo. And can you go to the next slide? Yep. So today, really what we're going to do is we're going to show you exactly what we've done to craft and design a user journey. I'm going to walk you through connecting SLIs. I'm going to show you setting up the error budget policies. And then we're going to look at how we operationalize SLOs today and the things that we use in our meetings, and we find it very effective. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So one of the things you're seeing right here immediately is the core product at Blameless. We initially built our product around Slack integration, and we have a lot of feature extensibility within our Slack product. But something that we've done straight from the bat is how do we start the create SLO process? And really the way that we've done that is we've gone in, we've set up, basic, task right here and types. So create SLO as a type. And what this helps is, as you can see at the bottom, once we've assigned everyone to the respective roles, you can see that we have this list. And this list is really useful because this is the starting point from when you're creating an SLO. You want to get people together and understand the objectives that you need to meet and the tasks and goals that need to be accomplished before you can truly get to that point of operationalizing SLOs. So if we look, you can actually see right here in our product in the front, we have the task right here. The first one immediately is define user journey and Blameless and document incident channel. So we're not going to go through that one entirely, but what we will use is we have a document right here, which is our settings page SLO. And this was actually authored by one of our SREs, Daryl Papa. And we had a couple of reviewers here. But what you can see is this is the general structure that we try to accomplish here for defining what a user journey might be. And you can see that in this user journey, there are 3 critical areas that we feel we want to monitor and understand better from customer satisfaction. And we've also outlined a service diagram. So if we tie it back in, once we get the agreement that the user journey reflects the customer happiness or user happiness, which was done through a reviewer process right here, we do have sign off. Then we can start to link user journeys to services. And that's what we've done here. We've identified, okay, what are all the endpoints that we want to monitor inside of this user journey? And then how do they connect to the disparate microservices that we have internally? Blueprint internally is one of our systems that measure or handle settings related data. And then finding the correct services for user journey. So we've done that here already, and you can see like we isolated the key ones and we really tried to keep it simple. You can see that there is a bit of an abstraction here because we do have a REST interface, which is called Resto. And we're not trying to measure that here because really that's just a throughput. There's no reason that it applies to customer satisfaction at that point, since Blueprint is responsible for delivering the primary. And then we can go in and we can document the SLI endpoints and locations. And we can see that we've done that a little bit above here. And we've also done the SLI definition down here, which is understanding exactly what the engineers want to set up to measure that. And measuring in the latency, we're using a P9 percentile right here. Once we've done that, we'll define the thresholds and we'll go into from that. But here's the piece that I actually accidentally glanced over, create a service and service registry. So this is actually tying back to the core SLO product. So this is on our development instance, but you can see here, what we'll actually need to end up doing is going in here and creating, we'll call this the blueprint service, and we'll just say service responsible for delivering the data. And once we have this, we'll actually start to pull some information that we've done here. So you can see that we actually have the PromQL, because internally we use Prometheus. And this is all of the APIs that we're trying to measure above here into one unified query. We'll go ahead and copy that. And this is where we actually want to go in and we want to start defining our SLI. So for this one, really, it's just settings latency. We're going to set this as a setting or a latency SLI type. We're going to go into the Prometheus. So it's the one we're using in training. We'll paste this here. But another thing we want to do also is we really want to capture the definition. So we'll make sure that we capture that. And obviously we can spend some time to make it pretty, but for this, we'll just go ahead and create this. Once you've created this, what our system actually is doing is it's going and it's trying to backfill as much data as it possibly can. So in Prometheus, they give us the luxury of having 28 days. And you can actually see as this system is going out and collecting data, this will actually update and show you when the backfill is completed. The reason why we highlight backfill here is because we don't want to allow you to create an SLO without having any relative data. So this is kind of a lock into the system. And if you tried to go create an SLO in a user journey right now, you wouldn't be able to actually use this SLI until it's finished. Generally, this SLI takes a pretty short amount of time to actually go in and pull all this information, as you can see. We have it on a pretty slow timer on the front end to actually continuously pull that. But once we've done that, we've documented everything, we'll actually go in and now we'll just set up our user journey. So this one really is just the user profile, because that is the one that this encapsulates right here. And the definition, we'll just keep it pretty simple. When user logs into Blameless product and clicks on settings page to view all data. We'll go ahead and set this in development and we'll assign it to myself. So once we've got the user journey, before we even create an SLO, what we really want to do is we want to create an error budget policy. This is the action that's going to be taken against when our SLO starts to exhaust its error budget. So we'll create a new policy and we'll just call this blueprint creating. And what you can see is we have 4 thresholds that you can define. You can see right here that we'd start at 25 error budget deletion, and there's a number of actions that we can do. We can turn them on. We can notify via email, via Slack. We can create a blameless incident. We have a ServiceNow integration as well, and you can create an incident or problem and define the group that you want to set it to. You can go all the way to 100%. Most people generally sit around, the more critical phases, threshold 2, but it's pretty flexible in the sense there. Once we've defined what we want to do with the error budget policy, we'll actually move into the user profile, user journey that we created. And we'll go back here and we can see that now we're in the setup, SLO, and blameless. So we've created the user journey, we've set the error budget policy. Now we need to actually go in here. And this is going to be the settings page, latency. We'll use the blueprint alerting policy that we set up, and then we'll use the blueprint service, the settings latency. And we can see here that we can select what objective threshold that we actually want to meet. This directly correlates to how much allotment or allocation you have to your error budget. So obviously less 9s, more error budget, more 9s, a lot less. Let's choose something like 3 9s, for instance. And let's say we want to do 250 milliseconds. We're going to get a preview of the actual data to see, are we close in relative proximity to what we're able to do? And this is all development data too. So yes, these numbers are high, but we're trying to show, a high load service. As we change it too, we'll see that things start to fluctuate down. But in this example, let's do something a little bit more aggressive. Let's say 200 milliseconds or 2 seconds. And actually, let's go 99.5. Because we can see here, we're going to exhaust some of that budget pretty early on. And this is only a 1-hour snapshot. So we have 28 days of backfill data. So I'm assuming that this data actually might be a little bit more aggressive. Let's ensure that we set the comparison operator. Let's make sure that all of our requests are less than or equal to 2 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, 2000 milliseconds. Let's set this to development. And then what's happening in the background right now is we have the SLI data that we've pulled from your APM. You've created an SLO. Now we need to check against all the SLI data that you have, and we need to check for any violations that are actually occurring on that SLI data in accordance to the SLO that you've set there. So this is a pretty slow or pretty short process. You'll see that you might get something immediately, but the SLO isn't respected, because what's happening is we're starting to build out this data. And if I continuously refresh here, you'll actually see that more data starts to kind of slowly populate in. And after probably about a minute of populating data, you'll actually start to see when that data comes in that will start to get some burn down. Now we did a pretty aggressive burn down, so we're going to see a pretty steep slope in the error budget right here. And then it starts to trail off because we saw on that graph that we didn't have any more violations. Once you're in this phase and you start to do your operationalized review, we have this commenting section. And this is really useful because when you're in a meeting and you're talking about an SLO, it's really important to capture data around specific plot points in the graph. And we found this extremely valuable because when we see anomalies within the graph, the biggest thing that you need to do is go and check that, but you also want to leave a historical record. So for this instance, we see there's just a small burn down. It could have just been a blip based around a WebSocket that we use for the settings. Now what we could do, and you can see once you've left a comment that there's an indicator that there was a comment left at that point in time. What we would do is we'd go and we'd start to look at our real-time monitoring systems and try to identify why there was a burn down here. This is a bit aggressive. Normally, if you have a slope like this that's pretty gradual, you're not going to use an aggressive tactic like this where you're going to leave a comment and go that route to do real-time monitoring. But if you see maybe like a spike down and a spike back up, it's something that's worthwhile that you want to go and investigate too. So we've left that comment there, and then we can also mark it as resolved once we've done our actual due diligence, and everything funnels into the resolve column, but we still want to leave that for historical purposes. So let's say that you have an SLO that does just violate really fast, and what does that look like? Well, in Blameless, if you use our core product, you can actually create incidences, and we have some example incidents right here that are created, and what it'll do is it'll immediately create an incident channel for you. It'll tell you exactly what happened, how much of the budget has been consumed, and it sets the war room for you to go in and operate with your team and trying to identify exactly what's going on with the SLO. And this is a good time to do monitoring into your real-time metrics and external systems, and then identify if you need to restore an error budget. And restoration generally should be used very cautiously because it can be misused or abused in the sense that if you truly didn't need the restoration, or if the restoration was used in conjunction that your service did actually fault and there was customer dissatisfaction, you don't want to use this. But in this instance, we could just say small anomaly. And we can give it, let's say, 800 seconds back. And what will happen is this graph will actually show that there was some restoration happen. This graph is also populating more data, as you can see. But then we've also had a little bit tick back up. Obviously, I did a small amount of duration in form of restoration, so we don't directly see it in the graph. But that is the basis of the product at a very high level, and how we use it day to day inside of Blameless. Thanks.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dyllen. And hopefully, people get a view of visually what goes into crafting SLOs and user journeys, and connecting all the pieces together, and orchestrating that all the way from the people and process is equally important as the underlying tooling that's in place. So I think that's been our biggest learning as a company. And when we talk about where we failed was if you try to tell an SRE or any engineer to go and set up a user journey and SLOs in a silo, that is guaranteed to fail. And the whole process that goes into creating SLOs especially the people aspect, is extremely critical in getting buy-in and doing it consistently so that you can scale it across your entire organization. And the second most important thing as a review is just that you're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. But just you need to have an iterative mindset to get the correct SLOs, to get the correct thresholds, to make sure that the right teams are in place, to educate. There's a big education component around this, around SLOs and the concepts around it. So happy to address any questions that come up. So one thing that we did want to share with you, again, this is a internal, as part of operationalizing SLOs, there's crafting SLOs, connecting SLIs and setting error budgets and stuff like that. But there needs to be a practice of operationalizing SLOs. And the reason why is because you want to make this a sticky practice. Many of you probably have internal, operational review meetings where you look at your key reliability metrics, like the number of incidents we're having. Are we completing our postmortems or not? Or what are the status of those action items? What are some customer reported issues? So this is something that we practice internally. It's on a weekly cadence. And what we wanted to share as a getting started point for the folks in this call is this is something that you can take today and literally just like start it today, start it tomorrow, review it on a weekly basis, have a very concise agenda, 30-minute meeting. And in that, the first thing we review is our SLO dashboard. Okay, we know what our critical user journeys are. How are we trending? What are some outstanding action? There's a lot of discussion that happens around that gets captured, but more importantly, are there things that the development teams, the engineering teams need to plan for in order to avoid tripping our air budget or consuming our entire air budget? And again, it's what makes us proactive, because a lot of times we'll discuss the issue the week before sprint planning, and that feeds into the sprint planning for the next week. Attendees in this meeting are folks from product, from SRE, from the core component / service engineering teams, and so on and so forth. It's a very collaborative discussion. We look at recent / urgent high priority incidents that have come up. We get the input from our customer success and support teams to understand any underlying issue, any issues that have been coming up. And this becomes what happened most recently is where our customer success teams started to give us some indication of one or two customers out of the many that we have that, hey, they're starting to see some latency issues. Well, the first action item that we captured out of this was to say, hey, let's go set up an SLO for that particular user journey because it's affecting our customers. We review on-call issues. If you do have an internal on-call, there's this constant stream of unplanned work that's kind of flowing into this on-call person or team. And so we review some of the critical things that are coming up to look at any of the patterns. And one other thing that we do, and again, this is totally up to you whether you want to do this or not, is the security operational items that come up as well, right? Because that's kind of under the purview of our SRE team. So, the idea here is that you should leverage this as much as you can. You can use this today to get started. Even if you have nothing today, it's a really good exercise to get the right folks in the room and have a tight agenda around operational topics to discuss. Next slide, please. And we'll leave you with one last thing here, which is some of the advanced SLO practices that we've seen. We're happy to have some offline discussions around this as well. But this notion of composite SLOs, where how can I combine two or more SLOs from multiple different services to represent a end-to-end product view of what my overall reliability performance is, right? And this is where we can apply and or type functions, and you want to look at the availability and latency of something, and like it has something, a component must be available and fast enough for that to be considered reliable, right? The other concept here is, when an SLO violation happens, how do you effectively treat that as an incident and actually drive that into your incident management process and make sure that things recover quickly? Because keep in mind, an SLO violation is, what you've said is, when we violate our SLO, we are actively, acutely affecting our users and customers. So those must be treated as incidents. Right? And of course, hopefully you already have some real-time monitoring in place as well. Dyllen sort of talked a little bit about giving back the error budget to certain teams, and you can drive a practice around this. So you may have services that must take downtime during certain hours of the day. And that's okay, that's perfectly normal. And that will automatically consume the error budget. And so you can, give that error budget back, but make sure you document that, this was the reason why this was consumed, and we're giving this error budget back. So you have an audit trail, right? The other practice is, of course, correlating changes back to the SLO and sort of change the trends in the SLO graph. Then being able to very quickly understand and troubleshoot and look at, what is happening inside my environment that's causing certain, changes in that SLO to happen, right? And then the last thing here, which we think is actually very critical, is that, your SLOs they're not like diamonds. They're not going to be there forever. They don't need to be there forever, especially at the thresholds that you have. And it's something that you should have a practice internally to review these periodically. Are these still valid? Because keep in mind, your organization, your teams, your products are constantly evolving and constantly changing. So why should your SLOs be static? They shouldn't. They should never be static, right? So there's a constant, we suggest maybe once a quarter or once every 6 weeks, where there's like a general high level review of, are these still the valid user journeys, capturing the correct customer experience? What are the changes that we've seen in our services and our teams, and so on and so forth? So next slide. And so just a quick recap of the benefits that you get from operationalizing SLOs. And this is coming not just from our experiences, but from the experiences from a lot of the different customers that we've been working with, and what we hear from them, which is at the highest level, there's this strong buy-in, alignment, shared context between product, engineering, and the business, right? But underneath that, we see benefits like reducing the cognitive and manual toil that goes into crafting those SLOs and user journey. If you follow a systematic process, very much like incident management for creating SLOs, you will be more effective and efficient at doing this, right? SLOs are a data-driven way to drive that alignment. You can detect customer impacting issues before they become incidents, as we've measured. One thing that one of our customers said is that, SLOs give you the ability to surface technical debt that's directly related to reliability or the lack thereof, right? And again, have a very principled discussion. And of course, if you're doing this well, you're always going to be ahead of your customer's experience and not reactive. So, and that's it. So if you found this session useful and new things that you learn, we'd love to have deeper discussions with you. You can join our alpha program. You can click on the form and just fill out your information. We'll learn about your goals. We'll learn about sort of what are the problems and challenges that you're facing, or you could be just like completely thinking of a brand new initiative, and that's perfectly fine. You could have a certain level of maturity with SLOs as well, and that's great. Those are all great discussion points for us. And what we'll do as a combination of a training / our product itself is help you get started with really what we like to consider the first but most essential step of doing effective SRE practices, which is setting up SLOs, right? And the benefits that you can get from that, and we get from at Blameless, is that we're co-developing this product together. You get a white glove experience, and you'll get to, you won't be starting from complete scratch. You'll have like a partner with you that's helping you not make the same mistakes that we have, or some of the other customers and users we've worked with have made. So you'll have a good foundation and starting point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashar and Dyllen. So if you are at all interested in joining our Alpha program, as part of the recording and follow-up for this session, we'll also send out a form if you're interested to sign up. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions from the audience. So feel free to include those in the chat window and we can get those answered. If there are any questions that you would also like to get answered with us offline, feel free to email us at slo@blameless.com. But with that, we'll open it up to any questions, and also really wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today.